I still remember the hush of that evening, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the trees themselves are listening. I'd set out early that morning, just me and my pack, to follow a trail I'd walked once before. But somewhere along the way, maybe when I stopped to refill at a cold stream, or when I lingered too long at a ridge to watch the hawks circling, I lost the markers. At first, I wasn't worried. I'd been hiking long enough to know the woods had a rhythm, and if you listened carefully, you could usually find your way back. But as the light thinned, that confidence began to fade. The familiar signs were gone. No footprints, no worn-down path, no blazes on the trees. Just the dense forest closing in, every trunk looking like the last. My boots crunched on damp leaves, and I could feel the shadows growing long, stretching fingers across the ground. The air was cooling fast, carrying with it the earthy smell of moss and cedar. I paused, trying to listen. Sometimes the forest gives you clues. The sound of running water, the faint hum of a road far away. But there was nothing except the rustle of leaves high above and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. For the first time that day, a little knot of unease settled in my stomach. I knew enough not to panic, but I also knew the rule. If you lose the trail, you stop and think. I dropped my pack beside a fallen log, sat down, and tried to breathe in the calmness of the woods. That's when I noticed something strange. A small bird, a jay, with its sharp crest and curious eyes, had landed on a branch just a few feet away. It tilted its head at me, gave a short call, then flitted to another branch deeper into the forest. Without thinking, I found myself standing and following. It sounds foolish, maybe, to follow a bird, but in that moment, I figured I had little to lose. Each time I hesitated, the jay called again, always a few steps farther ahead, as if leading me. My boots slid over roots and damp soil, and the last light of the sun filtered in patches through the canopy. I kept going, guided by the flash of blue feathers darting between the trees. I didn't know it yet, but that bird was about to change my night, mingled with something else. Fresh water. My heart lifted. If there was water, maybe there was a stream, and if there was a stream, there might be a path beside it. Sure enough, the jay swooped down and perched on a branch right above the glitter of a narrow creek. Its waters rippled faintly, catching what little light was left. I knelt down, splashed some cold water on my face, and drank from the bottle I'd just refilled earlier, thankful I had it filtered. The jay gave one last call, almost like a farewell, then darted off into the shadows. I never saw it again. But the creek was a gift. Following its course, I soon spotted a faint track where deer had walked along the bank. Their hoofprints pressed into the mud, leading downstream. I knew from past trips that trails often intersected with water sources. With a little luck, this creek might cross the very path I'd lost. I tightened the straps on my pack and set off beside the water. The forest was alive now in a different way. Owls beginning to call, crickets chirping their steady rhythm, and the faint crack of branches as some unseen creature moved through the underbrush. The night creatures were waking, and I knew I needed to find shelter soon, whether I stumbled on the trail or not. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt. The creek wound through thick tangles of brush, and twice I thought I heard footsteps behind me, though every time I turned there was nothing but darkness. I told myself it was just the woods settling into night, but I picked up my pace all the same. Then, just as the last light drained from the sky, I spotted it. A flicker. Not a firefly, not a trick of my eyes, but a real, steady glow between the trees. A campfire. I froze where I stood. Relief washed over me, but so did caution. Who else was out here in the middle of nowhere, and what kind of company would they be? I stood there in the shadows, heart beating harder than I liked to admit, watching that faint glow pulse between the trunks. Firelight in the woods is both comfort and warning. It can mean warmth, safety, and company. Or it can mean trouble, depending on who tends it. My bed rolls. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Still, it isn't easy to approach strangers in the wild at night. I stepped forward slowly, letting my boots crunch on purpose so I wouldn't startle them. Immediately, both figures straightened, the tall one turning with a sharpness that told me he carried some kind of blade at his belt. The smaller one raised a lantern, the light falling across me where I stood. "Evening," I called, raising my hands a little, showing I meant no harm. "Didn't mean to sneak up. Lost the trail before sunset. You folks mind if I step in?" For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then the tall one's face softened, and he gave a low chuckle. "Trail eats more people than bears do in these woods. Come on in. Fire's warmer close up." I stepped into the clearing, the heat of the flames washing over me, and suddenly the unease melted away. The woman smiled kindly, pushing a tin plate toward me. "We've got stew enough to share. Sit. You look like you could use it." And just like that, the forest's loneliness slipped off my shoulders. I hadn't expected strangers, but in that moment they felt like the help nature had sent me, just as surely as that jay had. The stew was simple: beans, potatoes, a hint of onion. But I don't think I've ever tasted anything so good. Hunger sharpens every bite. But it wasn't just the food. It was the warmth of company, the sound of human voices after hours of nothing but the forest's whispers. The three of us sat, shoulder to shoulder around that fire, and the night no longer felt like something pressing in. It felt like a blanket wrapped around us. The man introduced himself as Daniel, a carpenter who hiked these woods whenever he could get away from his workbench. The woman was Marcy, his younger sister, visiting from out of state and getting her first taste of backcountry life. They'd been out for 3 days already, working their way along a loop that cut deeper into the range than most casual hikers dared. As the fire crackled, we traded stories the way strangers in the wilderness often do. Daniel told of a storm that had once pinned him in. "You just got lucky the bird was headed the same way as water. Either way, it worked." I didn't argue. Maybe it was luck, maybe something else. But as I sat there, listening to the fire pop and the woods hum with crickets, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had wanted me here, in this very circle of light. The night grew colder, but the fire held strong. Daniel added another log, and Marcy passed me a blanket from her pack. I stretched out near the warmth, feeling the exhaustion of the day sink into my bones. For the first time since I'd lost the trail, I felt safe. Still, as the fire dimmed and the stars overhead sharpened against the black sky, I couldn't help but wonder what the morning would bring. Morning came with a chill that clung to the air, the kind that makes you draw your blanket tighter and wish for another hour by the fire. The embers still glowed faintly, and Daniel was already crouched over them, coaxing life back into the flames with practiced hands. Marcy handed me a steaming tin cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed with pine needles and patience. Rough, bitter, and perfect. We broke camp slowly, rolling packs, shaking dew from tarps, and I felt a heaviness in me that wasn't just the weight of my gear. There's something about sharing a fire with strangers that forges a bond stronger than introductions and handshakes. When it came time to leave, I almost hated the thought of parting ways. But Daniel knew the forest well. He led me to where the creek bent sharply to the east, pointing out a faint cut in the brush. "Trail picks up just through there," he said. "You keep south on it, you'll be back at the main path by midday." I thanked them both, more than once. Marcy smiled as she tightened the straps on her pack. Remember what I said? Sometimes the woods choose to help. We shook hands, and then I watched them head one way as I turned the other, their figures shrinking between the trees, until only the sound of their boots on the leaves remained. Alone again, but not lonely. Not anymore. The trail appeared just as trust the people you meet along the way, and trust that the forest knows how to guide its own.